Hi, my name is Princess Aimis, my pronouns are they, them, and today we are going to be discussing the topic of transmedicalism. Some of you may be asking, what is transmedicalism? Well, that's a great question. Transmedicalism is the current civil war happening within the trans community. And yes, it is my belief that transmedicalists are the new TERFs, trans-exclusionary radical feminists. In a more formal sense, transmedicalism can be described as a view of trans identity that holds that experiencing dysphoria is required for legitimacy. For those of you who don't know, gender dysphoria is the distress associated with an incongruence between a person's gender identity and their sex assigned at birth. There is also a key element of society's response to a person's gender identity and expression that also needs to be recognized when discussing gender dysphoria. The problem is that the gender dysphoria that transmedicalists center is intended to be exclusionary. To them, dysphoria must and can only operate within a binary context. It must pertain to an individual wanting to or already undergoing a full medical and social transition into either male or female. To transmedicalists, there can be no in-between, no outside of, or any spectrum in general. It must strictly be male or female. Now, why is this an issue? The idea that trans identity starts and ends at man and woman is categorically false, regressive, and deeply rooted in white supremacy. When discussing the topic of gender dysphoria, it is important for us to recognize Harry Benjamin, who is an endocrinologist most known for his clinical work with trans people in the 1900s. His work set the standard for how trans people would gain access to gender-affirming healthcare. While revolutionary for that time period, today, Harry Benjamin is considered a very polarizing figure within the trans community. While he did provide gender-affirming hormone therapy at no cost to many trans people, the guidelines he created around determining someone's eligibility to receive care was extremely narrow and exclusionary. It centered heteronormativity and a white standard of femininity that is unrealistic for many people. These attributes were assessed to determine if the performative presentation, emotional distress, and sexual orientation of an individual met the proper criteria to be considered trans. If it was determined that someone didn't meet that criteria set by Benjamin's rigid scale, they would be denied access to healthcare and the ability to transition because they were just written off as a man with a sick fetish. As time progressed, by 2011, Benjamin's standards of care were re-evaluated by trans people to become more expansive and inclusionary. They completely abandoned Benjamin's rigid scale in hopes of making gender-affirming care accessible to all trans people. With this understanding, it is important to emphasize that trans people do not need to operate within the white supremacist gender binary in order to be validated in their transness. I would strongly encourage any individual that identifies within the trans community and is subscribing to this exclusionary ideology to unpack the ways in which they have internalized white supremacy and cis normativity. I want to challenge us all as a community to recognize and truly understand that we are not a monolith. We cannot continue to push the very ignorant idea that there is only male and female when we literally have intersex people born outside of that binary context who experience human rights violations on their bodies every day. Instead of arguing about maintaining the white supremacist gender binary, we should be actively calling for an end to the forced medical intervention that takes place on intersex infants, the true mutilation that no one ever seems to want to talk about because it does not align with their conservative agenda. Upholding the idiotic view that there can only be two genders, man and woman, is not only unreasonable, it is unsustainable. At this time, we should all have learned the difference between the words sex and gender. We should also understand by now that there are and have always been more than two. But just for clarification, if you do not know, sex relates to what you are assigned at birth, and gender relates to how you identify. For the remainder of this video, I'm going to break down and analyze some major moments in pop culture where trans people have utilized their platforms to push transmedicalist talking points. In the end, I'm going to address some of the common themes brought up from each person and encourage us all as a community to do better. Popular, yet polarizing figures who have publicly expressed transmedicalist views include, but are not limited to, Blair White, Hunter Schafer, Leyna Bloom, and Flame Monroe. It is deeply concerning to me that individuals who are considered trailblazers within the queer community are actively doing the work of the oppressor. They are constantly holding the community back and preventing progress. It is my belief that with recognition and fame comes great responsibility, and I am extremely disappointed with the way that these trans individuals have chosen to utilize their platforms. Starting with Blair White. Some of you may be asking, who is Blair White? Blair White is a transsexual, conservative, right-wing political commentator. I am using the term transsexual even though it is antiquated and has been deemed by the community as offensive for objectifying trans people by reducing them to their genitals.
These words and images, they matter, and people need to be more responsible.
I even try to stay away from transsexual because I still have my own little things with the word. And I feel like when somebody say transsexual, there's so much negativity to come with it. So I just prefer transgender.
I think that transsexual almost to me makes it only about the body and the transition, whereas transgender, I feel, speaks more to the entire essence of what politically what our bodies say.
The preoccupation with transition and with surgery objectifies trans people, and then we don't get to deal with the real lived experiences. The reality of trans people's lives is that so often we're targets of violence. We experience discrimination disproportionately to the rest of the community. Our unemployment rate is twice the national average. If you're a trans person of color, it's 4 times the national average. The homicide rate in the LGBT community is highest amongst trans women. And we focus on transition, we don't actually get to talk about those things. There's a young woman named Ilan Nettles, was just walking down the street with some friends, you know, minding her own business, and she was catcalled by a couple of guys, and one of them, once they realized she was trans, she was beaten into a coma, and 5 days later she died. This is the reality of so many trans people's lives in this country, trans women of color whose lives are in danger simply for being who they are. And we're looking for justice for Ilan's murder, and we're looking for justice for so many trans people across this country. And by focusing on bodies, we don't focus on the lived realities of that oppression and that discrimination.
But since this person is passionate about separating herself from the transgender community, it is important for me to make that distinction clear. Blair White is an individual that actively votes against her own right to exist.
There's a million reasons why I'm supporting Donald Trump in this election, but that's one of the biggest ones just on principle, that I don't want to live in a world where we have, the media completely constructing a reality and setting the window of accepted thought. So for me, a vote for Trump is a vote just against the media.
It is obvious to me that this individual deeply struggles with internalized transphobia, but for whatever reason, people seem to take her very seriously. She has gained over 1 million followers and is constantly placed on large-scale platforms to spread anti-trans propaganda. Here is an example of some.
I think that the concept of a transgender umbrella is inherently an issue, right? Because when you're talking about something as nuanced, complex, full of social dynamics, medical dynamics, so many things to be considered, when you're talking about a transsexual, you should really be specific, right? And this entire concept actually of transgender is relatively new. Like, it came about in the 70s or 80s through queer theory, when originally it was about transsexuals, which was considered a medical diagnosis, which was a medical process, and it defined something very specific. So for me, when I hear that non-binary, which, if I'm to understand correctly, means that
androgynous.
Right, and it means you identify somewhere in between male and female. That's not what a transsexual is.
The definition of a trans person is somebody whose body has been altered, or somebody who identifies as a different gender whose body has been altered via hormones or surgery.
And there's 2 genders, so if you want to say, you identify as a different gender, it had to be one of those 2, which would make you a transsexual if you're actually trans. I think it makes about as much sense as saying that bisexual is under the straight umbrella. It's like, no, that's a separate thing. And I think there's beauty in being separate things. There's beauty in having your own lanes. And my concern is there's so much, clearly, as we see today, really heated conversations about trans people, that when you start adding in queer theory, non-binary, it just makes it muddy, and the people at home, don't know what you're talking about.
Those were just a few of her many exclusionary talking points that are not rooted in logic or facts, but a desperate need to fit in, not realizing that under no circumstance will the Republican Party or the general public at large ever accept her. Let's break down some of these points, because they presented several examples of logical fallacies. Logical fallacies are common errors in reasoning that lack nuance and are overly simplistic. First and foremost, the concept of transgender is not relatively new, nor did it begin in the 70s or 80s. That is a conservative manipulation tactic because they want to willfully misrepresent facts. While language is constantly evolving and the specific word transgender may not have been used historically, there are very clear instances where the concept of transgender identity existed hundreds and even thousands of years ago. If we look outside of the white supremacist context, there are several indigenous cultures that have recognized gender diversity, such as Native Americans, South Asians, Mexicans, and even Africans. So I really want us to move away from the idea that gender diversity is a new concept. While it may be new to you, history and facts tell us that this has always existed. Another one of the transmedicalist talking points expressed in the previously cited video pushes the idea that an individual cannot be transgender without altering their body from their understanding of male to female or vice versa. I want to highlight the ways in which that does not make sense. Transgender does not mean transition. One is an identity and the other is an action. So pushing the idea that a trans person can only exist after transition is illogical, because what were they before they transitioned? An imaginary friend? A ghost? This mindset creates so many unanswered questions because when a trans person has not yet started but is actively seeking out the resources to transition, what identity does that fall under? When a person wants to transition but is denied access to healthcare, what identity does that fall under? When a person has begun to transition, but their transition is not yet complete in your eyes or is still in the beginning stages, are they not transgender? The reason why the term transgender is an umbrella term is because there are a wide variety of identities that fall under that category, and every experience is not going to be the same. But the idea that people need to be removed so that the people at home can understand it easier is truly ridiculous. My life, nor anyone else's, should be confined to the limits of another person's narrow mind. Finally, she went on to compare being non-binary to being bisexual, which is another false equivalence, because how are you comparing a sexual orientation to a gender identity? There is clearly a lack of understanding of the terms that you are using. You cannot change the definitions of these words to fit your agenda. She represents to the trans community what Candace Owens is to the Black community. They are both members of marginalized and historically oppressed groups that actively betray their own community in order to align themselves with the majority and profit off of their own people's suffering.
Directly with trans
because the second
people?
bomb.
Have you ever worked directly?
I am right now.
No,
We're
directly
surrounded by
in
them.
services in terms of nonprofits
Sir,
and actually
she's a
getting
trans
clientele.
person.
She's not
That's my
grassroots.
entire
She
career.
is not a grassroots
Not
person
grassroots.
because truth be told, a lot of our
What does that
community
even mean?
is in grassroots.
A lot of trans people in my life,
Trans-led
yes.
organizations that are ran by trans people. I really want to see what you've done for those organizations because I don't see any of y'all on the front line.
I'm on
The front line, like what are you talking about? I've dedicated, hold on. I've dedicated my entire life to, in my own way, and you can disagree with it because we all have our vehicles and our methods towards
Absolutely.
promoting trans acceptance and the ultimate progression of the quality of life of trans people. I've dedicated my entire life to that, right? I access millions of people every single month on all my social media. And I have people reaching out all the time saying that I've saved them from,
what are
just
you
like we
physically
mentioned,
doing?
suicide.
What are you physically
doing?
Physically.
That is the point.
Have you ever taken on a client loan? Have you ever had someone come to you
I'm sorry,
homeless
do you
and
have
give them
like,
resources?
I'm
do you have
sure
like
you
a
guys
trans
feel very-
humanitarian youth fund
You guys
or
are asking
something?
questions and you have no interest in the answer. I'm sure you guys are very, very proud
Because
of the
you're
fact that
going
you can
around in
walk.
circles, Blair.
I'm sure you guys are very proud that you can enter a building and work with 25 people at a time. I access millions
Oh,
every
that is
month,
not
babe.
what
That's what I
nonprofit work
do.
is.
You know, you
You
can.
are
It's really
so
disappointing disappointing that you would ever equate community services. It's disappointing that you would disrespect all of the people that are in community service and all of these social workers that actually do help trans people.
When you said something about what is grassroots, that's the problem that I feel that some trans
using a
influencers are
metaphor for
disconnected.
something that's
That is not a
They're gonna
metaphor.
speak in platitudes
That
the
is
whole
a
time. That's
tangible
what they're gonna do.
resource organization. Because if you, this is where y'all's privilege come in. Because if y'all don't need
My privilege?
services,
My
from
content is a
trans-
resource.
If you do not need
First
services
of all,
from
ma'am, don't come from my
nonprofits
privilege.
that are trans-led,
Because
you have
I was raised by
privilege
drug
and you
addicts. I have HIV.
I'm sorry.
I apologize for the complete absurdity of that clip, but it is clear that she and her associate are far removed from the harsh realities faced by members of the trans community. As a grassroots organizer, I am disgusted by this talking point because we are the ones actively doing the work to help trans people, while in your field of work, you are the only person profiting. Your content is not a useful resource for trans people because you are literally profiting off of our community's neglect. If you are using your platform to promote and support legislation that hurts trans people and denies them access to health care, you are not an inspiration, you are a detriment. Next, we will be talking about Hunter Schafer. For those of you asking, who is Hunter Schafer? Hunter Schafer is a model and actress most known for her work in the hit television series Euphoria, where she plays an extremely over-sexualized transgender high school student. This individual is very young, so I don't want to be too harsh in my criticism, but they are very popular and unfortunately chose to utilize their platform to push transmedicalist talking points. As we all know, many conservative states have began introducing anti-trans legislation that prevents people from getting access to gender-affirming care at any age. For whatever reason, in 2022, Hunter Schafer publicly co-signed the idea that non-binary people are to blame for the anti-LGBT legislation being passed in Florida. This message was started by social media user @PiggyTaiwan, who has since been removed from Instagram. Schafer supported Piggy's idea that the pure existence of non-binary trans people forces trans men and women into sex work and forces cisgender people to hate the queer community at large. Now, I don't know what delusional world these people live in, but I promise you, even if you got your dream of non-binary people not existing, Republicans will still create laws for you to not exist. It is not that Republicans just don't like non-binary people. They don't like any member of the queer community as a whole. So this anger towards non-binary people is very misguided. We should all be intentional about wanting to join forces with non-binary people because there is strength in numbers, and encourage everyone to vote these conservative leaders out of office. We should be liking and promoting posts that provide resources for trans people who are living in conservative states where the laws will most likely never change. That would be a much more productive use of our time than telling us that non-binary people are forcing binary trans people into sex work. What non-binary person is denying you access to housing, healthcare, jobs, or education? Because the last time I checked, we don't have the power or privilege to do any of that. I can't even believe that such an unserious talking point has gone viral, and I am even more annoyed that I have to talk about it. She went on to validate the false idea that non-binary people do not experience gender dysphoria or seek medical intervention. Just so everyone knows, there are many non-binary people that utilize surgery and hormones to affirm their gender in a wide variety of ways. This could be through top surgery, voice therapy, or microdosing on hormones to achieve more subtle changes. Some non-binary people even undergo what many might consider a full transition. Either way, it is a lie to say that non-binary people do not experience gender dysphoria or seek medical intervention. There is absolutely no evidence of that being true, so we should be intentional about dispelling that myth. At the end of this nonsensical rant, they randomly bring up Black trans women in a very disingenuous way to manipulate us into thinking that they are allies. First and foremost, I am extremely uncomfortable with the idea of Black trans women being used as props to push an anti-trans agenda. I would encourage you to never do this again. They stated that Black trans women should be the voice of the community. And my response to that is, if you really feel that way, then why the hell are you talking?
Why are you talking?
Why are you talking?
There was literally nothing in this argument that made any logical sense. And honestly, it is such a waste of time trying to fight for the exclusion of non-binary people in the trans movement. Because who does that benefit? How do these talking points advance the trans community? The reality is, after that post was made, only more anti-trans bills have been introduced. I would encourage everyone to read Project 2025. Transgender people are mentioned on the very first page of this document, and it details their plan to essentially eliminate us. So I must ask again, what has this transmedicalist post done besides continue to create unnecessary division within the trans community and cause harm to all trans people? Our most recent transmedicalist girlie stems from the underground culture of ballroom. I plan on making a future video discussing the problematic elements of Vogue, but for now, we'll just discuss the problematic talking points of Miss Leyna Bloom. For those of you asking, who is Leyna Bloom? Her accolades include being the first Black trans woman to be featured on the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue, and she was also featured in the FX series Pose, which highlights the experiences of trans women of color in the 1980s and 90s. Instead of using her newfound fame to uplift the trans community, she randomly one day decided to post this very melodramatic message on social media. I'm going to quote her and reimagine her voice.
There's obviously been some confusion on who is trans and who is non-binary. I'm gonna sit this right here so we can understand who paved the way for you kids. You will respect your mother and all who have come before you with your spoiled, non-talented driving butts, blood, sweat, and sacrifice and death of my people and ancestors. Open that door for your honest clarification. Non-binary people are not trans. You have not fully transitioned or taking stages in gender reassignment surgeries. You may share some emotional similarities, but the distinction of your lifestyle is not parallel to trans folks. I do not take off my trans identity and temporarily decorate my anatomy. I will not let our identities be whitewashed or disregarded for mainstream influences.
She finished by stating,
You are not a feminine trans queen if you cannot walk these categories.
And then she went on to list cis heteronormative categories such as femme queen body, femme queen realness, and femme queen face. I apologize for my dramatic interpretation. These are categories of competition where trans people are judged based on their ability to pass. These categories literally trigger gender dysphoria and negatively impact the mental health of trans people, to the point where they feel like they need to participate in underground economics in order to reach this so-called level of passing and realness in society. The purpose of this is to be rewarded based on a white supremacist idea of gender presentation and beauty. Passing essentially means that a trans person has a gender attribution that is perceived as either man or woman by the general public through the result of various forms of transition. And underground economics heavily involves illegal, life-threatening, and dangerous routes that put trans people at risk in order to meet these expectations. But this is the part that nobody wants to talk about out loud.
A number of those women are going with a procedure on the black market, and it's had some deadly consequences.
Chrissy does not want to be identified. She got the black market shots a year ago, and she says she paid $500 for hers. She tells me she went with 3 other friends, and they vowed not to tell anyone. It was a big mistake, proved to be deadly. She says days later, one of her friends went into septic shock.
She died from not saying anything, because of what the stigma or, whatever. She was in her mid-20s. She was small. She was not out of shape. She went to the gym. She worked out. She went to work every day. And she did not use drugs.
When Chrissy made it to the hospital, it was too late to tell doctors about her friend's procedure, and she died.
I am in no way condoning silicone injections. It's something that I seriously regret. They can have major health effects. They can kill you. There are just so many scary things that can happen with them. And thank God that I'm alive and able to tell my story and warn people. I remember the first time I went, I'll never forget, my friend told me, so this is obviously illegal. I'm gonna come over to your hotel room when you check in New York City. And when Lisa comes to the front desk, we're gonna say that she's a friend or whatever. She's gonna come up and we're gonna do the procedure on the bed. But they would all refer to Lisa as their trainer. So when they got, pumped at these like pumping parties they would throw, they would say, oh, I just saw Lisa for a workout, like our personal trainer, which at the time I thought was like the cutest thing. I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna say that I just saw Lisa because my hips and my butt are gonna be bigger. And I hit up the ATM and I take out $500, $600, whatever it cost. I feel like it was somewhere around there. Lisa comes into the room. She had this like Coach bag with so many different little pockets in it, but it could pass as like a purse. And I think that that's exactly what was trying to get away with. Then I see Lisa pull out what I'm getting. It's this Voss glass water bottle and it's filled like to the brim with this like foggy petroleum jelly-esque but like more yellow and way more watery. And this next part is total trigger warning. This needle she pulled out was literally like a 7. Like it was thick. That needle goes right into you. No numbing, no nothing. You just have to take the pain. And before I know it, I am face down on the bed and my friend is holding my arm.
I was poor, so I didn't have the money, and they didn't have the money either. And they were boosting.
Yeah, the girls were steal
they
to
were
get
doing
the
a lot
clothes
of
and
boosting,
stuff.
They were doing that in ballroom too, and gathering at the thing. And then the girls would prostitute and never tell anybody.
Yes.
This is why the ballroom community and the pageantry community had a problem with me because of the visibility that I shine on the community. They deemed me a detriment to the trans community because I was not a ball girl or I was not a pageant girl that shined light on the trans community.
Right.
I was a porno girl. The pageant girls felt some type of way about me because I was naked. That was giving all this, and then the ball girls. And I'm like, how can any of you say anything about me?
How can any of who?
How can any of you say anything about me when all y'all on the low? And y'all steal.
Right.
I'm
right.
Openly. You boost. A lot of you girls have long rap sheet records for a gown. You girls have charters as long as my house
for a gown.
From my house front door to the exit of my subdivision. You have charters that long for a gown. So how are you girls ringing me up?
How they doing what?
Ringing me up.
What they doing?
Ringing me up for being a
right. When you're doing it too.
When you're doing it for a gown.
For a gown.
You can't look down y'all nose at me when we're all doing the same thing.
Right.
It's just that I'm vocal with mine.
Right.
And you're trying to win a crown.
Right.
All of y'all were trying to be some prestigious, upscale, demure, very mindful, very cutesy girls. And they've had to watch me crescendo throughout the community and land spots in places and occupy spaces, and they haven't broke the ceiling because they're still in those places trying to still be very cutesy, very demure, very mindful. And I love my sisters and stuff like that, but they have to come up off of me.
It also pushes the idea that all trans people want to pass so that they can be considered real, when that is not the reality. Trans people are not a monolith. And this is something that I'm going to repeat over and over and over again because it needs to be understood. As Janet Mock said, we should be actively doing the work to redefine realness because our trans existence is not artificial, a phase, or a trend. It is real. I would encourage Leyna and any other trans woman that thinks like her to develop a more expansive definition of the term real. You can start by researching Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, William Dorsey Swan, Crystal LaBeija, Lee Brewster, and Octavia St. Laurent. These are revolutionary, queer, trans, and gender nonconforming individuals who fought for you to have the freedom to walk around this reckless and naive. Because while our ancestors have died through blood, sweat, and tears, you are alive and actively dishonoring them with your transmedicalist views. It would behoove you to learn your history before you ever try to read anybody. Please open a book. It is also important to note that this unnecessary dramatic statement was in response to Leyna not being invited to the Met Gala in 2023. When I first saw this post, I will admit I was extremely disappointed because this was somebody I looked up to and admired. Even though she posted something extremely offensive, I decided to respond with grace and said, "While I understand the point you are trying to make, it does not support your cause to exclude non-binary people from the trans community. It is similar to the ways in which TERFs exclude trans women from feminism. As a community, we should not be fighting against each other, especially over something as superficial as the Met Gala. There have been hundreds of bills introduced this year to erase our community, so it concerns me that you are erasing non-binary people from the trans community. Also, there are many non-binary people that do medically transition and have affirming procedures. It may not fit into the binary of male and female, but that does not make them any less trans. Thank you." To me, this was a very calm response to something that was extremely vicious and blatant. Instead of Leyna taking this as an opportunity to reevaluate her problematic statements, she deleted my comment because she knew I was right. She saw a lot of people were liking my comment and engaging with it, and she did not want to admit that she was wrong. When I noticed that my comment was deleted, I went back and commented. "Since my comment disagreeing with you was deleted, and you're responding to the backlash in such a terrible way, I will be unfollowing you. Thank you." Then she responds very childishly and dismissively, "Anyways." Mind you, this person just wrote a whole dissertation rooted in hatred and discrimination, but when she receives criticism, she provides very basic rudimentary one-word responses. The topic of transmedicalism within the trans community is deeply concerning because there is no need for this hierarchy to exist. Discrimination amongst people within the same marginalized group is counterproductive, especially when it is done as a way to fit into the larger society. The reality is, no matter how well you may think that you pass, no matter how fishy you think that you are, the cisgender community does not accept you. We are the only people that do. So listen to Beyonce and get information, quickly. Because this entire discourse is ridiculous. I should not have to take time out of my life to explain to trans people why they should not be transphobic. Just support one another. Period. Finally, I would like to speak on Flame Monroe. I'm sure many of you are wondering, who is Flame Monroe? Flame Monroe is a very difficult person to describe because while she does operate outside of the gender binary, she still has both transphobic and transmedicalist views. She identifies as both a trans woman and a man impersonating a woman.
So what would your identity be? I'm talking about like the technical, politically correct terms like bisexual,
what is politically
transgender.
correct? This is what it is right here.
Talk to me.
All of these labels and titles, you can identify as a blue-orange cow, a pink moon, and a green. When you get into bed with somebody, do you want some penis or some vagina? Because they ain't got nothing else. But everybody has a gender, a penis or a vagina.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a whole-ass man up under this wig. Ain't no women with penises. But we are female impersonators. I'm never going to be a woman. Even if I get a SRS, I still wouldn't be a woman. It's not going to bleed. I still have to have electrolysis in it before I even get it. I'm not going to have any children. And you still got to lube it up. It kind of defeats the purpose.
She is known for her work as a comedian and appearing in comedy specials alongside some very popular yet polarizing figures like Dave Chappelle and Tiffany Haddish. I think Flame Monroe is an important person to include in this video because she is significantly older than everyone else previously mentioned. It is also important for me to include diverse perspectives from various backgrounds and generations. Flame Monroe is a very significant voice within Black media because she is actively used to push anti-LGBT talking points. On many mainstream Black media platforms, she is one of the only Black queer voices. These platforms like to utilize her so that they can have someone within the queer community say the anti-LGBTQ things that they are too afraid to say out loud.
See, Flame, that's why, to be honest with you, that's why more people need to give a platform to you.
I don't want no platform. I don't want to be the spokesperson.
But I don't want you to be the spokesperson, but God damn it, can somebody talk some reality sometime?
Flame Monroe has admitted that in order to make a successful living, she has had to make straight cisgender people, specifically men, feel comfortable around her. And in doing that, she has had to invalidate the identity of not only herself, but all members of the queer community as a whole.
To be honest, my audience was never a gay audience. My audience was always the heterosexuals, and I played on that because I knew women loved me. Women loved how I dressed and what I did for them, and wherever the women go, wherever the coochie go, the penis was gonna follow. So the brothers was already in the room. Yeah. I had to learn how to make the brothers, the men, comfortable laughing, looking at me, because the stigma was, oh, if you laugh at that, you must be gay. So I had to revert to being her and him to make my whole audience comfortable, because women loved me anyway, but I needed the brothers to know, man, when I leave here, I'm going to do the same thing you're going to do. My stroke may be better than yours. You need to come on with it, you know? I just look different.
Yeah.
And when I made them more comfortable, the men relaxed this fear or I don't understand to, oh, you did your thing, Flame, man. You was cool. And I didn't take, man, you was good as hell as a disrespect. Yeah. Why would I do that? All the girls call each other bruh now. All the girls call each other bruh. I took it as a compliment because I was looking for the compliment. I wasn't looking for the, oh, that shit was whack. You need to keep that over there. Because I got that from the other comedians.
LGBT, ABCDFG, PTSD community. Because all these alphabets is blowing me out. I'm old school. You either like penis or vagina or both. I can't keep up with all this terminology. Asexual, bisexual, pansexual, skillosexual, crockpot sexual. I don't know. Don't ask me. I love my community, but we tripping over the wrong.
I've been a trans woman for 37 years. I still have questions about the new terminology in the trans community. I'm still a little confused about certain terms. So I understand that, and living in and being a part of the community, for us to say that we don't understand, imagine what it's like for somebody who's not a part of the community to hear the words non-binary or gender non-conforming and nobody explains that to them, because then they don't know. The problem is, we want instant gratification in the community. We want it to happen overnight. I'm old school. It doesn't happen overnight. I know the microwave is new. I grew up boiling it in a pot. We had to warm up food in a pot. I know it's an old analogy, but it's still the truth. This is the monster that we are facing with the youth. And it's the youth to me, because the older trans and gay people actually understand how life works. I'm not going to say regular life, because life changes all the time. But there is no patience in the youth. There is no patience, Don.
This person utilizes a manipulation tactic that is popular amongst people within her age group. They will oftentimes use age as an excuse for being offensive, intolerant, and uninformed. I really want to break down the generational curse of utilizing age as a barrier to knowledge. I do not believe that anyone's cognitive skills decline so dramatically when they become middle-aged that they are just completely unable to learn new things or exercise basic human decency. Also, age does not grant you immunity from criticism. Elder does not mean beyond reproach. As someone who is older, you should have a better understanding of the challenges faced by queer people and be happy that language now exists to describe our experience and acknowledge our reality. You should encourage the younger generation to continue fighting and advocating for the rights that we still don't have. I don't understand why anyone, especially an elder in this community, would try to discourage queer people from pursuing liberation. It makes no logical sense to me. And if you are going to be the representation for queer people on platforms whose audience reach millions, you need to do better. For the remainder of this video, I'm going to elaborate on some key points I think sum up this entire conflict. Number 1, scarcity. Many of us are operating in the mindset of scarcity, which is the belief that there is an insufficient amount of resources that we are all in competition for. And since it is a competition, someone's win has to be someone else's failure. But I want us to find a point when we exhale, because the winners feel like they have to reserve their resources for themselves and their particular group and disregard everyone else. To me, this mindset is very troubling because it creates an unnecessary division amongst groups that will greatly benefit from unity and solidarity. I really want to emphasize that it does not benefit us to be transphobic. It does not benefit any trans person to actively work to exclude non-binary people from the movement for queer liberation. It is a detriment to all of us. There are many instances throughout history where we have seen groups try to exclude or completely remove themselves from certain members of their community due to their intersections. Sylvia Rivera was booed by a crowd of gay men who wanted to exclude her for being trans. Cisgender black women have been excluded from feminism for years. Just look at their treatment during the women's suffrage movement. They were described as inferior by prominent white feminists. Queer people have actively been removed from conversations surrounding black liberation. Bayard Rustin, the individual that organized the 1963 March on Washington, was removed from the civil rights movement for being gay. Black queer people created the Black Lives Matter movement just to be excluded and pushed under the rug when they become victims of brutal violence. Trans women are actively being excluded from feminism. And now, non-binary people are being excluded from the trans community. All that this tells me is that there will always be a desire for some group to feel superior to another. Number 2, trans people are not a monolith. It is my hope that we've all come to a point of understanding that everyone involved in a particular group is not the same. All black people are not the same, all women are not the same, all trans people are not the same, all queer people are not the same, and that is okay. Diversity is a beautiful thing and it should be recognized and celebrated. People should not be excluded for being different. That is discrimination. Number 3, we don't need a trickle-down theory on trans. This is something that has not and will never work. Audre Lorde, the iconic black lesbian warrior poet, taught us that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. If we want genuine change and real-life progress, we must work to liberate the most vulnerable and marginalized within our communities, not prioritize the most privileged. They are the most privileged for a reason. They have an access to power that we never will, and they know it. This is why they want to exclude us from every moment of progress or blame us for asking for too much at one time. They ask us to wait so that they can obtain their rights and forget about us once it's achieved for them. Number 4, assimilation and the white supremacist gender binary. Passing was a topic we discussed earlier in this video. It is when someone is perceived as the gender they identify with, rather than their sex assigned at birth. This is oftentimes limited to 2 options. We have to recognize the reasons why trans people are encouraged to pass as either men or women. They're encouraged to pass so that they can easily fit into society without people knowing they are trans. Many people aspire to achieve the goal of passing so that they do not have to experience harassment or discrimination while doing simple tasks such as walking down the street, trying to use the bathroom, or even finding employment. Many people view passing as a method of survival, but it is devastating to me that people have to fear for their lives until their transition is quote-unquote complete in the eyes of society. The idea of passing is deeply rooted in the white supremacist gender binary, and I do not believe that people should be forced into those boxes. In life, there should always be more than 2 options. It is my hope that we will one day live in a world where people are free to just exist and their identity is respected no matter what stage of the journey they are in. Someone's lack of understanding of another person's gender should never lead to hate crimes. In conclusion, we need to strip ourselves of the idea that there needs to be this hierarchy. We are all trans, and if we want to progress in society, we need to maintain unity. All of our rights are under attack, and we cannot fight back in an effective way if we are divided. For true liberation to occur, we must recognize, uplift, and include our most marginalized. Thank you for your time. I hope that you learned something new today, and if you like this video, please follow our page and visit www.princessaimis.com to support my Black and trans-owned business. I hope you have a very productive day, and always remember that your life is a fairy tale that you get to write. So create your own happily ever after. Thank you.